Welcome in, whiskey freaks, to the Blind Tasting Podcast, your number one attitudinal bourbon destination. I'm John Stark, and I'll be bringing you candid and sometimes irreverent whiskey news, opinions, and reviews on the industry and the products they've been bringing us for hundreds of years. Today we take a closer look at the hot dog versus sandwich debate. Is a hot dog actually a sandwich? This intense debate will never die, but today we're going to get to the bottom of it right here on the pod. Yeah, no, we're not doing that, guys. But what we are doing is whiskey, and I've got some really fantastic things to talk about today. I've got a ton of stuff, so let's dive straight into it. So Buffalo Trace, they might, and I say they might, have a new release. And you're going to want to hear about the possibility, kids. Heaven Hill is going to be releasing a 19-year-old wheated whiskey. We're going to play Guess the Whiskey, Volume 3. And then we examine whether or not snorting cocaine is any different than sipping on a good whiskey. We're going to talk about Mitch McConnell. He wants to save the trees. And finally, I review Old Granddad Bonded Straight Bourbon Whiskey. So here's the deal. First, I want to thank everybody that subscribed and tuned into the pod. I want to say thanks especially to everybody in the United States. We've got folks in Germany and Japan, UK, even in Spain and Singapore now. Listen, I love digging into the whiskey world and sharing this stuff with y'all, so thank you so very much. Please, if you haven't, subscribe to the pod on Apple or YouTube. The Blind Tasting Podcast is literally everywhere, so click that button so you don't miss any new episodes. I'm putting episodes out at least once a week, so be sure to subscribe, and hell, you might even grow to like it. Tell your friends, tell your enemies, I don't care, just tell somebody. So, the Willy Wonka of whiskey, Buffalo Trace, they might be bringing something new to the whiskey world. That's right. Buffalo Trace's Eagle Rare, you know them as Eagle Rare 10 right now, they might be adding a new bourbon offering soon. And that's just maybe, but I think likely. A recent filing with the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau, the TTB as we refer to it here in the whiskey world. So it shows that a 12-year-old Eagle Rare bourbon might be on the way. So the reason that we feel this way is because Buffalo Trace submitted an application for a new whiskey bottle label to be approved for a straight bourbon whiskey that's aged for 12 years and bottled at 95 proof. So turns out the label was actually approved back on January 31st, just not that long ago. So there's been no official announcement from Buffalo Trace, but I think it's very likely. Think about it. We've already got Eagle Rare, and it's great. You know, it comes in at 10 years old, and it comes in at 90 proof. So the question for me is, will this replace Eagle 10? It kind of makes sense to me that it would. Why the hell would you? Okay, I know, we're dealing with Buffalo Trace here, so I guess anything goes, especially when you put into that framework of like Millennium and stupid shit like Traveler whiskey. But this one makes excellent sense to me. They've got the extra stock put up aging. We all know that now. We've been seeing Buffalo Trace everywhere. E.H. Taylor starting to come out in the wild all the time. I'm even starting to see Eagle Rare. So I'm pretty sure. And this is a great way for them to do two things at one time. First of all, it gives them an opportunity to raise prices. Now, they've raised the ABV and they raised the age statement theoretically on this 12-year. So you can expect it to be, I would say, probably $10 to $15 more than what we got now. I know I'd pay it. I think most everybody would pay it. The Eagle Rare 10 is already terrific. And think about how fast that flies off the shelves everywhere. When was the last time you walked into your favorite liquor store and saw it for less than $60? Now, you can get it at the distillery all the time. Well, every few days anyway. But in your liquor store, not so much. I look for a new release at 12 years and 90 proof at around $60. And that's at the distillery gift shop. And at least that's my feeling on it. The other thing this does for Buffalo Trace, keeps them very, very relevant in the minds of all of us whiskey freaks, and simultaneously allowing them to give us something new. It really just looks good. It's good for PR. It looks good if they bring on this new creation and get rid of the 10-year. It's great PR. And think about it, especially during these kinds of tumultuous times with the tariffs and all the uncertainty. I say keep your eyes peeled for Eagle Rare 12-year very soon. Now, Heaven Hill, they're going to be releasing a 19-year-old wheated whiskey. They've announced its latest limited edition release, the Heaven Hill Heritage Collection 19-year-old Kentucky Straight Wheat Whiskey. Now, this is part of the annual collection that they bring us each year that highlights some of the distillery's oldest whiskeys, and the 2025 release features a wheat-heavy mash bill. It's 51% wheat, 37% corn, and 12% malted barley. It's bottled at 100 proof, and it was aged in just 277 barrels back starting in 2005. It was aged in Rickhouse Y, which that doesn't mean a lot to me, but okay, it was aged in Rickhouse Y. The research I did tells me that that's at their main campus location there in Bardstown. Okay. And this is Heaven Hill's oldest wheat whiskey to date. Now, the good folks at Heaven Hill say it's got a nose of seasoned oak and honey and delivers flavors of clove, nutmeg, and aged oak, followed by cinnamon graham crackers. The medium-length finish is warm with hints of maple syrup, caramel, and a peppery tingle. The whiskey comes in a premium box in Heaven Hill's signature blue. It'll be released in March, so that'll just be right around the corner, and it'll be available in limited quantities nationally and internationally at an MSRP of, hold on to your whiskey glasses, $299.99. And now, evidently, backed by popular demand, we're going to play that game called Guess the Whiskey. I had so much fun doing my Elijah Craig 18-year review, which you should go back and listen to, by the way. And that's where I shared some crazy reviews with you that other folks have given Elijah Craig 18. I talk about the symphony in your mouth and some of that other stuff. And you know, these reviews, they were from the experts, and they were ridiculous. They were word salad bullshit. But they inspired me. What can I say? So today, we're going to play a game I call Guess the Whiskey, Volume 3. In this game, I read a made-up whiskey review. Or maybe it's not made up. And then you guess which whiskey or bourbon or whatever it matches up with the best. They might be real, and then again, they might be fake. I'm going to leave that up to your imagination. Just humor me, guys. This is how I entertain myself. It's good, clean whiskey fun. So let's get started. But first, I'm going to need some special music to set the tone. Oh yeah, here we go. And let me get my announcer voice ready. And here we go with number 1, Guess the Whiskey. If a bald eagle draped in the American flag swooped down from the heavens and handed you a glass of freedom, this is what it would taste like. It's so patriotic, you'll feel like you need to salute the bottle before every sip. Okay, kids, this is too easy, right? Patriotic, salute the flag. I just talked about it. It's Eagle Rare 10-year. For now, maybe 12 years soon. Here we go to number 2. Opening a bottle of this bourbon is like getting an invitation to a secret society where everyone speaks in caramel and vanilla tones. The finish is so long and warm, you'll feel like you're being wrapped in a cashmere blanket knitted by the bourbon gods themselves. Ooh, sounds exclusive, right? Think John Wick here. Have you seen Justified? Anybody? Any guesses? It's Blanton's Single Barrel, guys. Okay, and here's number 3. Guess the whiskey? This bourbon is like taking a vacation on a tropical island, but instead of a beach, you're surrounded by barrels of aged bourbon rocking gently on the waves. You can almost taste the salt air and the adventure in every sip. Okay, this is super easy again. Ocean, anybody? Ocean? Okay, this is Jefferson's Ocean Aged at Sea. That was too easy. All right, let's just do one more. I don't want to bore everybody to death. Here we go. This bourbon is like shaking hands with a rugged old mountain man who slaps you on the back with a fistful of caramel, cinnamon, and pepper. It's strong and unrefined and leaves a lasting impression that'll have you coming back for more. Okay, this is another easy one. Cinnamon, old cranky man, rugged, anybody. It's old Granddad 114, kids. And that makes perfect sense to me. And for the 30-ish bucks that old Granddad might run you, it's a solid choice. I've got some old Granddad here, bottled in bond or bonded here at the house. And guess what? That's what I'm going to review in just a few minutes. So hang with me, see what it's all about in just a little bit. Hey, thanks for humoring me and my little bit of stupidity here on the pod. Look, if you hate it, I'm sorry. If you like it, I'm still sorry. I think sometimes I act like a 14-year-old kid here pretending to be on the radio. So what can I say? I figure all the seriousness we've got in the world right now, it can't all be serious, right? And now I segue into something very serious. We're going to talk a little bit about cocaine and whiskey. Okay, actually, it's retarded mostly. You're not going to believe this. Listen to this. These are the kind of folks running countries. This is an example of a real genius that's in charge of millions of lives. Get this. President Gustavo Petro of Colombia. He just went on record saying cocaine is no worse than whiskey.
Say what?
Yeah, you heard me right. Here he is in his own words.
La cocaína es ilegal porque la hacen en América Latina.
Let me translate, because I took a lot of Spanish in high school and college. Let me translate what Mr. Petro said. He said, I'm a dumbass. What's his big idea? He says he wants to legalize cocaine worldwide, and that would shut down the drug trade. That's what he believes. He thinks legalizing cocaine will stop the drug trade. Isn't that kind of like legalizing jaywalking and thinking it'll stop people from getting hit by cars? This is crazy. And keep in mind, Colombia, it's the worst offender when it comes to producing and exporting cocaine. And it's mostly coming here to the United States and to some of you folks over in Europe. But good old Petro, he believes, can he really believe this? He believes cocaine isn't illegal because it's more dangerous, but because it's made in Latin America. But here's the kicker. Since he took office in Colombia, cocaine production in his country, it's skyrocketed 53%. They're sending over 5 million pounds of blow here to the United States since he took office. It's amazing. So to his point where he says whiskey is the same as cocaine, my man, my genius, my guy, the guy that runs a large country. What about things like, your health? Look, cocaine's freaking dangerous. It messes with your heart. It messes with your brain. Really, it screws with your whole body. And one wrong move, and you could just be gone. Boom! Just like that. Whiskey? Too much of it isn't good for you. Drinking and driving, not an especially solid plan. But whiskey won't drop you dead on the spot like the nose candy. And smoking crack cocaine, that literally destroys the entire body's ecosystem. Yeah, it's a big word. I didn't know I had it in me there. Kind of pulled that out of my ass. Cocaine can cause you to drop dead. It is no bueno, kids. Not to mention strokes and even brain damage. We all know whiskey, it can mess with your liver, it can mess with your heart if you drink like an idiot. But it's not going to wreck your whole life overnight. If you drink responsibly, you're a lot better off in the long run, and you don't need to call the drug abuse hotline to figure out that Coke is way worse than whiskey. This is my opinion here. This Petro dude, he's really a clown. He's trying to deflect attention, and I kind of understand it. But he's doing this to basically protect his own ass from the drug lords. In my opinion, it's really that simple. He's probably, in my opinion, bought and paid for by the cartel. So there's that. And that, my friends, will make you say things that are batshit crazy, like whiskey and cocaine are basically the same. Okay, so as long as we're talking about idiot politicians, that brings me to my next subject, Mitch McConnell. Normally don't try to directly talk about politics here. That pisses some people off. I get it. But then I see something like this. Now, this came out a few days ago, and it really gets my goat. And for those of you with infinity bottles, that means it pisses me off. This is just another example of the government screwing with things and probably eventually screwing things up instead of letting the businesses that are impacted by the thing figure out and come up with a solution to whatever problem they're having. Now, this is going to get deep, kids. Just give me 2 minutes here. That's all I ask. You might like it, you might not, but at least hear me out. So good old Mitch McConnell, the good Republican senator from Kentucky. And he's got a buddy in Virginia, Democrat Senator Mark Warner. Now, they've got this great idea that they've dreamed up, and they've introduced a bill into the United States Senate. Sorry, all you international folks listening, but this directly affects bourbon and whiskey. So they've introduced a bill in the United States Senate called the White Oak Resilience Act of 2025. And that sounds pretty good, right? Oh, White Oak Resilience, great, good news. But if it passes, guess what? You're going to pay for it. So what's their big idea? Well, it's really saving the white oak trees. That's what they say. That's a noble cause, right? I mean, I love trees. I love the environment. And hell, I love whiskey. And I know I've even touched on this topic here on the pod. We know, or at least they say, the white oak trees are dwindling. The populations of white oak trees are dwindling here in America. And if that's the case, we should really think long and hard about it, right? Maybe. Last I checked, we got lots of the oak trees in our country. And don't just believe in me, the good folks at the Forest Service here in the United States, they got the numbers for you. Okay, well, there isn't an exact count on the number of white oak trees in the United States, but estimates show, now look this up, you're welcome. Estimates show that white oak is one of the most abundant and widespread species in the country. Now, I found all these amazing facts poking around on Al Gore's amazing internet. Here you go. White oaks are commonly found throughout the eastern and central parts of the United States, from southern Maine all the way down to Florida and as far west as Texas and the Great Plains. I also came up with some rough figures from the United States Forest Service. The good folks who, manage the forests here in America, they say that white oak is one of the top species in terms of volume across United States forests. And they estimate there are billions of individual white oak trees across the United States. Billions. Their words, not mine. And last I checked, it only takes about 2 trees to make a whiskey barrel. Now, keep in mind, the entire bourbon industry used about 2 million white oak trees last year. Now, I'm not a conspiracy theory kind of guy, but it kind of sounds like Y2K all over again, right? Or remember global cooling back in the 1970s? Brrr. I do. We had so much fun in the snow back then. It was amazing. But we didn't get an ice age like they said we would. Crazy stuff, right? So, what am I missing here? What I'm missing here is the part about politicians. Mitch is protecting the bourbon industry. You can't blame him for that. He's a Kentucky senator. It's a Kentucky industry, right? But he's going to use your tax dollars to subsidize it. Basically using tax dollars to fund research, and then whatever the plans are to implement God only knows what about oak trees across our entire country to keep cheap and plentiful oak barrels for his buddies at the big distilleries. Listen, I'm almost done ranting, folks. I promise. Listen to all these agencies that are going to get your money for this if this passes. I looked at the bill. Believe it or not, I read the bill. Amazing, right? USDA, National Institute of Food and Agriculture, Natural Resources Conservation Service, the United States Forest Service, and an unknown number of land-grant colleges across the U.S., just to name a few. So I've talked a great deal about the oak trees before on my podcast, and in a very positive way. You can go back and listen. That was one of the first episodes. I understand that there's a concern. So if, and I do say if, the oak trees are dwindling in population, something might need to be done. Well, we've already got the White Oak Initiative, right? I've talked about that before. These folks have got together and they've done some great work so far. They've done great work already, and they're collaborating with the University of Kentucky and other groups, including big companies like Brown-Forman, Heaven Hill, Independent Stave, and many, many others. You can pull up a White Oak Initiative. You can look that up on the internets. They're doing this already. And that's eventually, hopefully, they're going to have some good results there. And that's a good thing for the industry and ultimately for us whiskey guys and gals. So what's wrong with them continuing to identify issues and then work on solving the problems, if there are any, amongst the stakeholders who have the most skin in the game? You know, the industry and the industry leaders and the stakeholders in that ecosystem, and not by all us taxpayers. We're not talking about solving homelessness or food insecurity here, kids. It's a hobby. It's alcohol. It's not necessary for life. Nobody ever dropped dead because they didn't have their fix of pappy. The industry, the whiskey industry, just here in the United States, is valued at something like $18 billion. And you know how many liquor stores are here in America? Well, I looked that up too. I didn't have that answer, but I looked it up. We have over 46,000 liquor stores here in America. There are over 2,000 distilleries in America. So I'm thinking, hey, bro, how about y'all use some of that cash to help solve the problem with oak trees yourselves, guys? It wouldn't be unheard of, really. How did we get penicillin or the automobile, or even back when we had the big typhoid outbreak like 100 years ago? The solution came from the companies providing the thing. All these industries and many others over the course of history, they faced a problem and they fixed it right away themselves. And the argument of, well, Stark, they'll just raise prices on all us consumers. Yeah, they might. But that's kind of how it's supposed to work. I mean, who should pay for it if not the folks who benefit from it? Let me give you an example where this has worked without stealing money from the general fund. The wine industry focused on the issue of sustainability in recent times to a very positive outcome. The concerns were raised about pesticides and environmental damage being created by vineyards across our great land. So what did they do? What did the vineyards, the wine companies, what did they do? They got together, they worked together to create sustainable farming practices. Groups like the Wine Institute and California Certified Organic Farmers. They got together, they promoted organic methods to reduce environmental impact. They did it themselves. The wine industry led this movement, and they covered the costs of switching to organic practices and investing in new techniques without relying on government funding. So good old Mitch, he wants us to pump taxpayer money into white oak conservation while distilleries, they rake in billions of dollars. And I got nothing against them. I love them. But that's kind of like passing a law to make sure Apple doesn't run out of iPhones. Look, I believe it's important. It's really critical that we think about things in a different way. Maybe step back from it. Maybe peek around the corner. Look at it from an angle. Whatever the hell you need to do. But just nodding our heads and going, okay, Mitch, that sounds great. We love our barrels. We like the oak trees. Good, Mitch. Very good. It's not going to happen for me. We're going to question shit here, especially if it seems fishy or odd or, in this case, crazy. I mean, you could go through life that way, but I'm not fond of getting hustled. If anybody is going to hustle us, you know it's going to be those guys and gals in Washington, D.C. Enough said. Okay, kids, now it's happy time. Or at least I'm done with all the ranting and the crazy heavy stuff like politics and the crazy world leaders and the crazy ass shenanigans. And guess what? It's the moment you've all really been waiting for. My review of Old Granddad Bonded Straight Bourbon Whiskey. You're probably asking, Stark, why another bottom shelfer? And I say, well, it's not technically always on the bottom shelf, for the record. but it's kind of in my wheelhouse at 100 proof, and the price can't be beat. Fairly fond of Jim Beam products too. I love visiting their distillery, and I really enjoyed like some of the Bookers and some of the little books. I think they do less craziness, I guess, is kind of what I'm saying. And some people would call that boring. I like their consistency. And so that's just another one of the reasons why I thought I would do another Beam product here today. Probably the biggest reason I have, well, it's sitting right here on my shelf. So there's that. So that made it easy. And like I always say, it's easy to find and it's not going to break the bank. And I almost always promise to frame my tastings and reviews, almost always, on value and availability. If you can't find a bottle, then why the hell bother figuring out if it tastes good? And if it costs $500, then yeah, no one can afford it. Nobody has that kind of cash right now. Not if you want to stay married anyway. Alrighty then. So let's do a bit of history. Okay, not much history. Let's do 2 minutes of history and then get to tasting. Yeah, you know what? Screw the history. No history lesson today. I just want to get into tasting this thing. I just want to find out what this 100 proofer is all about. But we still got to have some deets. So here we go. Going to make this fairly quick here, guys. The company, Beam Suntory. The distillery is Jim Beam in Claremont, Kentucky. The age of the whiskey, well, we know that since it's bonded or bottled in bond, it's at least 4 years old. But I've seen where some folks have speculated it may be as old as 5 years-ish. Now, the mash bill, it's a high rye mash bill. It comes in at 63% corn, 27% rye, and 10% malted barley. So it's got that real high rye thing going on here. The story behind that is, it's very interesting, actually. If I remember correctly, it's because Basil Hayden Sr., he had the audacity to buck the trend back in the 1800s of just sticking with a more corn-centric mash bill. Basil Sr. thought he would mix things up a little bit and use a lot more rye and then literally spice things up. He wanted something more bold and with more personality. His words, not mine. The price of this one is somewhere between $22 and $25 depending on where you pick it up. Now, I picked this up for $24 right here in my neck of the woods. I think you can expect to pay around that, depending, like I said, where you live throughout the country or the world. All right, let me pop this baby open and get to tasting. Huzzah! Okay. Oh yeah, I bought this bottle. Nobody at any distillery or company, nobody anywhere gave it to me in exchange for a good review. And I always feel like I got to give that disclaimer. If I was getting free whiskey from somewhere, then in my mind, why the hell would you trust me? This is my whiskey, and I'm going to share it now with all of you. So today I'm tasting with a Glencairn, my favorite limestone branch Glencairn, actually. That should come as no surprise. And in my glass, I'm going to hold it up. I'm going to try to gather what color I'm looking at here, or colors. And remember, I'm looking at it in the glass, not in the bottle. It's a warmish kind of a copper color with kind of like, it's got a really interesting orangish tint to it, or an orangish tone. We're going to go with that. So to me, it looks promising. Oh, and never judge the color by the bottle alone. Like I said, you got to pour it into the glass to really kind of get a look at it. Make sure you've got decent lighting. If you're sipping in the basement or lurking around out in the garage, you don't want a dim flickering light. That's not going to do it for you. You're not doing your bourbon any favors if you don't have good lighting. Step into the glow, my friend. It shouldn't be the setting for a horror movie. Step into the light. You deserve it, and your bourbon deserves it as well. Head to the kitchen or dining room, or if you've got a man cave with decent lighting, that'd work too. And I always say, the color will sometimes give you an idea of the breadth of flavors you're about to put in your mouth. In my opinion, the darker the hue of the whiskey in your glass, the deeper the flavors might be. It's not always true, but it is sometimes, and it is oftentimes. I'm going to worth noting that every single time. So let me nose this thing. I'm going to get into this stuff. very little alcohol in the nose. And I know it's 100 proofer, but yeah, I'm getting almost no alcohol in the nose. And what I am getting is a musty, kind of a dusty type of, maybe it's musty rickhouse smell. Kind of like you're strolling through a dusty rickhouse on a tour. We've all been there before. If you look close enough, you can even see the dust particles in the air floating around. It's not a nasty smell, just dusty rickhouse. And naturally, there's caramel and some vanilla. Typical notes you'd expect. And boy, along with the typical notes, cinnamon. It's front and center here. There's no doubt about it. No mistaking that smell. But so far, so good. I do kind of feel like I should be getting more here, though. When you think about the high rye, I mean, it's 27% rye in this mash bill, but it is a youngish whiskey, maybe no more than 5 years, so maybe that's why I'm not getting any more intense notes on the nose. Or I could just be getting ahead of myself. Okay, let me get a sip of this thing. Surprisingly good mouthfeel for such a young whiskey here. I love the way it's coating the inside of my mouth. And that's cinnamon. Buddy, it is strong up front. And understand, it is cinnamon and it's strong, but it's not like a fiery or an aggressive cinnamon. It's more like you notice it, but it's not slapping you in the face. It's like balanced and controlled, more of a warm, gentle cinnamon to me. And as that cinnamon fades, I'm getting some other terrific notes of caramel and pepper, like a peppery spice, really. Some baking spice. Yummy baking spices, actually. Like, think brown sugar and nutmeg. And I really feel like that nutmeg is that old rickhouse that I was getting on the nose. It's probably this nutmeg, at least in my opinion. Let me get another sip. Yeah, all the things, they're mixing together so nicely in the mouth. So pleasant. And that cinnamon, it's loud and proud. Don't get me wrong, but like I said, it's not an aggressive cinnamon. And as it fades away, those other notes come through, and they're playing so nicely together. Let me get one more sip. Sometimes I feel like if you don't have at least 3 sips, you're doing yourself a disservice. So I always like to get 3 sips in here. And that finish, it's there. It lingers in a good way. Decentishly long. It's above average in length. That's what she said. So you're probably wondering at this point, what's the verdict? I'll have the answer right after the money spot. Are you looking to update your bar or man cave with some great photographs or wall art? Head over to Etsy at famousdocs.etsy.com and pick up some fantastic prohibition, whiskey, and gangster-related photographs and art. Okay, guys, you've got to check this stuff out. They've got Al Capone, they've got John Dillinger, Bonnie and Clyde, all kinds of cool photos over there. And if you purchase 4 or more items, you'll get 20% off your entire order for a limited time. That's famousdocs.etsy.com. famousdocs.etsy.com. And that URL, we're going to put that in the show notes. So, if you listen to the Blind Tasting Podcast, there are 3 potential verdicts. Are we going to keep it? Are we going to collect it? Or are we going to cull it? To keep it means to proudly display it in your liquor cabinet or bar. This stuff's good for a pour anytime, but there's really no need to stock up on it since it's always available. Collect it. Grab another bottle or maybe 2 bottles so it's so damn good. Or it just may not be easy to get your hands on a regular basis. Finally, cull it. Use it to loosen rusty bolts or sanitize a dirty toilet. In the case of Old Granddad, bonded, straight bourbon whiskey from our good friends at Jim Beam, I say, keep it. But I've got a caveat. And for those of you with infinity bottles, that means I've got an exception to the rule. My caveat, if you hate cinnamon, avoid this bourbon. Look, the proof point, to me, it's on the mark. It's 100 proof. And the flavors all mingle well together. I feel like it might even be closer to 5 years old the way it tasted to me today. And it's a manly man's drink. Okay, it's not just for men. It's for everybody. And even U.S. presidents were fans of Old Granddad. Harry Truman would start his day with a shot of Old Granddad as he ate his breakfast. Look, I'm not recommending whiskey as part of your morning routine, necessarily. But this stuff is delicious. It's bottled in bond. It's only $24. Keep in mind, again, if you're not fond of cinnamon, then I beg you, I implore you, don't grab this one. Otherwise, you got to have at least one bottle of this in your liquor cabinet. It's a staple, really. Yeah, the bottle looks kind of old-timey, and that orange label with old Basil's face on it, kind of creepy, but the whiskey inside, it's spot on. And last but not least, I got to give a shout out to the farmers, the distillery production guys and gals, all the warehouse workers, the bottlers, and the truck drivers. They're the ones that make it happen. So cheers to all of them. Well, that's all I got for today, Whiskey Freaks. Thanks for listening to the Blind Tasting Podcast, your #1 attitudinal bourbon destination.